Welcome to Authors Amplified. I am so excited to share the book and the author that I have today. This book kept me on the edge of my seat. I could not put it down, and there are some great lessons that we learn from what this author went through. So today we have Kimberly Haar. Am I pronouncing that right? I didn't ask. I'm so sorry.
You
Haar.
are. You
Okay.
are.
Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts. Kimberly, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Stephanie, for inviting me. It is such an honor.
So, before we just get started, could you just tell us a little bit about you and your background?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
I am a licensed therapist. I've got two different licenses. I'm a licensed professional counselor and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I have a private practice in Oklahoma where I have been a therapist for approximately 18 years.
Mhm.
And I've recently, like you said, I've written a book. So I am beginning to go out and speak at different places, churches, events. I'm a mom, I'm a grandma, and I am a worshiper of Jesus.
I love that so much. So I'm going to jump right into this because this book I just couldn't put it down. It had me on the edge of my seat. I had to just finish it because it was that good. So 4 years after your divorce,
hmm
something very traumatic happened. So would you share that story with us?
Sure. Like you said, in 2013, I made the decision to divorce my first husband. We've been married 23 years. And the reason we divorced is there was ongoing infidelities, and I discovered he'd been in an affair.
Hmm.
So at that time, I divorced him, but I also decided for 4 years I was going to remain single and just raise our youngest children, get them out of high school into college. And after those 4 years, I was going to then allow myself to kind of focus on me. So 2017 came around and it was January. I woke up in the morning and I just had this stirring that said this is the year I was going to be married again.
Mm.
And I thought, okay, this is exciting. I'm not sure how this is going to happen, but I'm all game. And so I met a man on April Fool's Day. And we dated each other for 30 days. Almost, I saw him almost every day. And when we met, I knew this is the man I wanted to marry. He knew it as well because during that time he had said, he told me, he goes, I want to marry you. And everything was going wonderful. I thought, I am finally happy again. And at the end of that 30 days, my ex-husband called me and he invited me to come to his home and said he wanted to talk about our adult children. And we had had many conversations. We had a friendly divorce. There was no reason to think this time would be any different. And when I got to his home, he began talking to me about wanting to possibly give him an opportunity to reconcile. He had changed. And I made the comment, I said, I have moved forward and I'm dating somebody seriously. And I said, and I think you need to as well. And he looked at me and he made the comment. He said, maybe I'm just going to have to go talk to that man.
Mm.
And I didn't really understand that because I had never talked to him about him. It wasn't a surprise he knew I was dating because we did have children together and it may have been, part of the conversation. But when I left his apartment, I just felt very unsettled with what he had said.
Mhm.
And it wasn't a threat, yet it felt like a threat.
Mhm.
And so I called my boyfriend. His name is Andrew. I called him and I said, "Can I stop by your home on my way home? Because I just want to talk to you just for a few minutes." And I went there and I explained about our conversation. And I said, "This is what he said." I said, "I am so sorry. He may show up and make a fool of himself. He may spread a rumor. He may just, it's going to be annoying. And I am so sorry." And I said, "But Andrew, would you fight for me?" And he said, "Well, of course I would." And I said, "Why would you fight for me?" And he said, "Because you're worth it."
Mm.
And little did I know that within 24 hours, Andrew was not just going to be fighting for me, but he was going to be fighting for his life. And so I left Andrew's home and I went home that night. I was empty nesting, I was staying by myself. And again, something stirred inside me and said, "Lock your bedroom door." This was not common. I always locked my house, but so I got up out of bed, locked my bedroom door, and I had no problem falling asleep. But at 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to my bedroom door crashing down off the hinges. And my ex-husband had broken into my home. He was intoxicated. He had a gun in his hand. And for the next 4 hours, I was assaulted. And then I was kidnapped. And I was taken to Andrew's house because I was told, as punishment for ruining my ex-husband's life, he was going to make me watch him murder the man I had just been dating.
Mm. Mm. Wow. Like there are no words there for that, right?
Yeah, it felt like a bad dream I was going to wake up from. The only problem is I wasn't waking up. And when we were driving to Andrew's house, I was under my breath. I was praying. By this time, it was about 6:30 in the morning, and I was praying Andrew would have gotten up, gone to work early. But I was just praying the angels would just surround him, be around him, and when we got to his house, I watched as my ex-husband mounted the first three stairs to his house, and he had a lit glass window in the front of his door. And before my ex-husband got out of the vehicle, he looked at me and he said, "Now you go do whatever you need to do." And he left the keys in the ignition. But I saw him get the gun, the extra bullets, and I actually heard three gunshots as he was going up and at that front door. So I knew there was no way Andrew was going to survive. Um, I escaped. I took the vehicle, and in my fight, flight, freeze, I think I drove around a little bit in circles trying to find somewhere that I could get help. And I landed at a super center that was just a few blocks away from the house. And I ran in and I just screamed, "Call 911." But at this point, my face was unrecognizable. My face was bloodied. I was just screaming hysterically. And what felt like minutes, I'm sure it was just, seconds, but it didn't feel like anybody was jumping to call 911. And so I looked down in my hand and I had a cell phone in my hand that was not mine.
Mm.
And all I can figure is I must have grabbed it out of the vehicle before I ran in. And I had heard that if you call 911, you can bypass like a password to open up a phone. And if any listeners are curious, yes, that it does work.
Mm.
So I called 911 and I just said, "You've got to get police there. Tell them to be careful because this isn't going to end good." And then I was taken back into a storeroom at the back of the store as I awaited for a police and ambulance to come for me. I later learned, because I was taken to the emergency room, but I later learned that Andrew had been shot 10 times. And I learned that because in the emergency room, I had only met one of his adult children because Andrew had three adult children. I had four adult children. And his one son I had met called my cell phone, and my adult daughter answered the phone. And he said, "We wish your mom well. We're sorry this happened, but we think our parents need to go opposite ways."
Mm.
And my heart, when I heard that, my heart just sank because I knew this is who I had been intending to marry. And so I would not hear from Andrew for another 4 to 6 weeks because he was in and out of surgeries. Even when he went to go stay with his adult son, I was told by his assistant at work, because I did talk to her a couple times, and she said the first few days, Andrew said he loved you and he wanted to be with you. But within, a week's time, he said maybe he thought it was the right thing that we went our separate ways.
Hmm.
And so I was devastated.
Mm. Well, you had just went through all of this and now you're finding out the man that you love and that you want to marry has decided not to, right?
That's right. Not only has he decided not to marry, he's been hurt.
Mm. Yes.
I think I was more upset about Andrew and I not being together than I was anything that had happened to me. And I had had horrible things happen to me in those 4 hours.
Hmm.
And so when I went home, I stayed for a few nights with my mom and dad at their house because I didn't want to go back to the house that had been my home because
Hmm.
it didn't feel safe anymore. So I stayed at my parents' house, and within a few days, I had an uncle and aunt that were going to Canada for the summer. They lived in the same town, and they said, "We just feel like we want to gift you our home for the summer."
Mm.
And so I went to their home, and they were giving me a tour of their home. And when they showed me their backyard, there was a big, beautiful pergola with big rafters and swings and a big cement floor. And something inside me stirred. And I felt like when the Bible talks about how Moses took off his sandals when he saw the burning bush and he said, "This is holy ground." Something inside me just knew this is where my healing was going to happen. This is where it was going to begin. And this is where I was going to meet with Jesus.
Mm,
And so every morning I would go out there. And in the first few days, all I could do is lay on my face and weep.
mm,
I'd wrap myself in a big green blanket. I'd put my face, I'd lay prostrate on the cement, and I would just weep and weep and weep. And I didn't know my body could cry that hard and that much. And I told the Lord, I said, I don't have any words to say. Lord, I don't even have words to pray. I
mhm,
said, I've never felt this empty and broken. And I remembered a scripture in Zephaniah that said that God sings over us.
mhm,
And I asked him, I said, Lord, I'm asking you, would you sing life back into my body?
mm,
And that those were the first prayers. And I began to listen to praise and worship music, and I let those words become my prayers.
mhm,
And little by little, the healing started.
mhm. Yes, you're just so transparent about this whole experience, which I want to talk a little bit, we'll talk a little bit more about, but what gave you the courage to share your testimony about all of this?
You know, it was a really hard decision because, first of all, as a licensed therapist, I'm used to holding everybody else's stories and walk beside people in pain. And it's not that I tell everybody my story, it's I am a story holder.
Mm,
But when everything happened, the whole world, well, maybe not the whole world, but my city, it was all over the news. They didn't use my name, but people knew that knew me, knew that it was me. And all they knew is that here was a woman that had been hurt. She'd been assaulted, kidnapped, a man was shot, and she was hurt. And that was my story. And I didn't want that to be the end of my story. I didn't want that. I wanted people to know my story's not that here's a woman that was hurt. I wanted them to know my story is about when you're hurt, you can get up and you can heal.
mm,
And I wanted the world to know here was a woman that was hurt, but that got up and ran to Jesus.
mhm,
And that by doing the work, found joy and happiness and life, a wonderful life. And I didn't have to be stuck in pain. And I wanted to pull back the curtain so that it could give other people hope that would say, you know what? If this is possible in this situation, just maybe I can do it too.
right, right. And if you could go back and talk to yourself right after the trauma, what would you say?
Yeah. I think that what I would do is I would go to her when she was laying face down on that cement floor at the pergola,
Mm,
and I would put my arms around her, and I would tell her that the day would come, she would smile again. The day would come, she would laugh again, she would dance again, that she was so much stronger than she thought.
yep. And that's for
And
somebody out there right now. That's for
y-
somebody out there
yep,
right now.
yep. And I would put my arm around her, and I would probably just cry with her.
Mm,
I would cry with her and hold her and say, "You are not alone and you're going to get through this."
hmm. Yeah. Something I got out of the biggest thing really I got out of the book was about forgiveness and how it plays such a large role in healing. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because you have done something that I don't know a lot of people even think they could do.
Mhm.
Can we chat and talk about that?
Yes. In healing, I like to say that healing begins with a choice,
Hmm.
not a feeling. God gave us all of our feelings to be felt,
Hmm.
but we don't want them to be our dictators. We want them to just bring us information. And the day everything happened, let me maybe first go to the forgiveness piece you're talking about.
Hmm.
Um, you know, I was in the emergency room, and my oldest daughter asked me sometime later, she said, Mom, do you remember what you said to me in that emergency room? And I said, No, I don't. And she goes, You looked at me and you said, Promise me you won't let this make you bitter. And the day that everything happened, I had just been assaulted for 4 hours. It was right before my ex-husband kidnapped me, but he looked down at me and he said, Tell me the truth, because the intoxication was wearing off. He said, Tell me the truth. I've gone too far. You could never forgive me. And I thought for a moment because I wanted to not just, placate.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, You're right. You have gone too far. There's no going back on this. I said, But I want you to know that this day I will forgive you. And it's not that I felt like forgiving. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that I wasn't angry. It wasn't that I wasn't hurt and numb and all the feelings. But I knew in my heart that forgiveness wasn't even an option. Unforgiveness wasn't an option because when we are unforgiving, we keep ourselves tied to whoever it is that's hurt us or whatever situation has hurt us.
Mm-hmm.
And as a therapist, I like to say that anger is like an umbilical cord between us and the offender. And where with a baby, an umbilical cord is meant to bring life and it's meant to bring nutrition and be healthy. With anger, anger takes life. It sucks the life out of us and it rots us on the inside. And the only person that can cut that cord is us.
Right.
And I knew in that moment that I would not let this be the defining moment of my life. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know how. I didn't know how I was going to heal. I didn't know how long it would take or what it would look like to forgive. But that day I knew I was making a choice. This isn't about my feelings. I was declaring over myself, I will heal. And that
Right.
included forgiveness. And that very night, I was at my mom and dad's house, and like I said, all the emotions were there.
Mm-hmm.
I was angry, hurt, numb. It was like a roller coaster of emotions. But that night, I prayed for my ex-husband. I prayed that he wouldn't be scared in jail. I prayed that he would sense the angels around him in the days and years to come because I knew he would need that presence. And I meant that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean the next morning when I woke up I wasn't angry
Yeah.
and second guessing that. But here it's been 8 years later, and I can remember things, and if I let things ruminate, and if I thought about all the hurt, I could get angry again.
Sure.
But when I'm reminded, I also remind myself I made a choice to forgive. And that freedom, that brings freedom to the person that
Exactly.
actually releases that. I did it for me. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't do it for him.
You're not saying
And
what he did was okay when you forget.
nope,
You're saying
nope,
that you're giving yourself that freedom. And I try to explain that to people when they say they can't
yep,
forgive. I'm like, it has nothing to do with you
yep.
saying, "Oh, it's okay what you did to me."
That's right. It is not saying it's okay. It does not mean a restoration of a relationship. If
Right.
I forgive somebody, let's say it's a friend, it doesn't mean I have to be friends with them, but it
Right.
doesn't mean I have to harbor anger and resentment because it doesn't hurt anybody but me.
Mm-hmm.
So, freedom, the forgiveness is really for the person that's doing the forgiving. And this is the beautiful part. Jesus doesn't ask us to do anything he didn't give us an example for and he didn't do first.
Right.
Because I think of when Jesus hung on the cross and he
Mm-hmm.
said, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? He forgave before anybody asked him.
Mm-hmm.
He could have said, This isn't fair. They did it. It's not my place to forgive for them. They're the guilty ones.
Right.
But Jesus said, you know what? I'm going to release that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what really that brought our eternal freedom.
Right. And you were talking about you could, think about things and let things come back up and be mad. That's what the enemy tries to do so hard is to
That's
bring
right.
those things back to your memory so that you get angry all over
That's
again.
right.
That all over again. I have dealt with something in just recently about the enemy trying to bring something up that happened years ago. And my
Yep.
got heavy. And I was like, nope, not going to happen because the forgiveness already happened a long time ago.
Right. Well, and forgiveness isn't a one-time thing
Right.
because we forgive for the whatever happened, but there's many times we have to forgive for the impact of what happened.
Hmm.
And so I get to forgive again today, maybe for the same thing. And it's like today when I'm reminded of my pain, you make a comment, you said I felt heavy and I felt it in my body.
Yeah.
And our emotions and our bodies are so tied together.
Hmm.
And when we begin to listen to our bodies, because if I'm angry and resentful, I'm going to feel it in my body. I'm going to be tense. I'm going to grit my teeth. My blood pressure is going to rise. And all that eats at my body. And so when I recognize, hey, this is an automatic thought that because we can't control the automatic thoughts that come to us. That first thought is, all of us have those.
Right.
But the Bible talks about take every thought captive.
Mm.
And so, one of the easiest things that I have learned to do is when I have a thought, and sometimes it takes a minute for me to recognize, hey, this is going in the wrong direction. And I'm listening to my body and I'm listening to the frustration I'm feeling. And I'll stop and I'll ask myself, is this something my Heavenly Father would tell me?
Mm.
And if this isn't something my Heavenly Father would tell me,
Yep.
then I'm going to kick it out
Hmm.
because that's what the devil does. He wants to replay, he wants to shame, he wants to put all of this on us and he wants us to partner with his lies.
Hmm.
And so the quicker we can recognize those are lies, if we can kick those out and remind ourselves it's not about my feelings. I've made a choice
Hmm.
and it's a healthy choice and it's for me.
Right, right. Okay, so let's go back to a little bit more of the story. I want everyone to
Huh?
read this book, so I don't want to give all the things away because it's a definite you must read. But
Thank you.
I love because the children had said, thank you, no more. But
Hmm.
then you went back. I read it and I'm reminding myself, but you went into the hospital. He said you could
I
come see.
did. I did. It
You
was six
said
weeks. It
something.
was Yes, it was
Yes.
like 4 to 6 weeks later.
Hmm.
And let me say before I get to that part, let me say in that 4 to 6 weeks, okay, anytime anything hard or painful happens, it's human nature for us to want to take control.
Yes.
And I learned a lot about I really wanted control. And so I would tell the Lord what he needed to do, when he needed to do it, how he needed to do it. And then I would tell him, and Lord, I trust you. Then I'd call my friends and I would say, put me on every prayer chain, and this is how you need to pray, when you need to
Yep.
pray,
Yep.
but we're going to give it to God.
Yeah.
And when I got real with myself and with God, and I said, I'm scared to trust you.
Mm,
Because what if you don't want what I want? What if I don't get what I want?
yeah.
And I think so often we are scared to give God our dreams and our plans and our futures because it feels so scary. But when I did that and I said, I've always been an honest prayer.
Hmm.
And because I told God all about my anger, frustration, and I said, God, I'm scared to trust you. And I
Mm,
really don't want to trust you, but help me learn to trust you. And then I declared, I am going to trust you. And it wasn't about my feelings because I didn't feel like trusting. I
yep.
was more like the little engine that could. It's
Hmm.
kind of like I want to trust you, help me to trust you, ooh, but I don't trust you. And I'd have to start it all over again. But
Yep.
when I finally said, Lord, I surrender my plans.
Mm,
And I said, Lord, if I don't get what I want, I'm going to choose to trust you, but I am going to complain a bit.
yeah.
I'm probably going to be, I'm probably not going to be happy. I may come and whine to you, but Father, I'm going to choose to trust you. And so as I'm working through my own healing with this, and this is just a part, the layers of healing, it had been 4 to 6 weeks. And I looked down at my phone. I was out at the pergola and I see a Facebook Messenger message, and it's from Andrew. And it says, hey, I'm alive. And his kids had taken my phone number out of his phone, so he couldn't call me,
Hmm.
but he found me through Facebook Messenger. And how do you respond to, hey, I'm alive? And
Right.
so I just said, yay. And I said, please let me explain. I wanted him to know that I hadn't led my ex-husband to his house that morning. I had been stalked.
Mm,
And so I wanted him to know that this wasn't me.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him, I said, can I come see you? And he said, not right now. He was getting ready to go back in the hospital for another surgery. And during this time, he had been under an assumed name because it was a crime scene. And so I couldn't find him.
Mm-hmm.
And so he ended the message. He said, I will contact you again in a few days. Let me get through the surgery. And he said, take care. And I thought, what does take care mean?
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean I wish you well in your life, but we're not going to be together? Does that, what does that mean? But I knew to wait. I knew not to push, to rush. And so that was the longest 3 or 4 days of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And about 3, 4 days later, I get another message on Facebook Messenger. I've never been so thankful for Facebook Messenger.
Right.
And it said a visit would be nice.
Oh.
Now, Andrew's 53 at this time, and I'm 50. And he says, but we have to sneak around my kids. And so here I am, 50 years old. I'm sneaking around the kids at the hospital. He's like, come at this time because they'll be gone. And so I slowly opened up his hospital room as I was going in, and he was laying there all bandaged up. And I said, Andrew, where does this leave us? And he said, I don't know. He said, I've read the felony counts. I know what happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you're really going to be messed up. And he said, I know what happened to me, and I'm going to be messed up.
Mm-hmm.
And something came over me, and I didn't let him say anything else. And I got very stern and I shook my finger in his face. And I said, Andrew Haar, you will never meet another woman like me.
Mm-hmm.
And a smile broke out on his face. 4 weeks later, we were engaged. 4 months later, we were married. And we have now been married for 8 years. And they have been some of the most amazing years of my life.
Wow. I mean, what a story of healing and forgiveness. And it just, I mean, all of it is so Jesus. It's just so Jesus.
Yeah. But you know what? It would have been Jesus if he didn't come
True
back to
story.
me.
You're
It's
totally
because I want readers to know that my story isn't just, yes, it felt like a Hallmark movie that turned to Dateline that went back to Hallmark.
right.
Um, but it's not that it's just wrapping this up in a bow and promising that we get what we want and there's
Right.
always this happy ending.
Right.
It's more about the Lord walks through us in those hard things.
Mm-hmm.
And what I didn't tell people, now at the end of my book, I give a little bit of a insight into this. Seasons in our lives come and go. The
Mm.
Bible says we're going to go through hard things.
Yep.
And leading up to my divorce, when I say I'd gotten divorced, well, at that same time, my mother had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and she went at the end of her treatment, went into a 5-week coma, and we were told she wouldn't live. So I was grieving the loss of my mother, although she did live, and it's been 12 years, I think 12 years, and she's totally fine when 7 doctors had told us she'd be brain dead.
Wow.
6 months later, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And we were told he'd have 6 months to live. So I'm grieving the loss of my father. When you get these diagnoses,
Mm-hmm.
it was these hard, horrible things. Now, he did survive, and it's been 9 years, and he's cancer free.
Mm.
But we go through things in life that we all go through different things, but
Mm-hmm.
pain is pain. Pain is pain. Grief is grief. Betrayal is betrayal. There's no pain Olympics. And, so I want to make sure that, listeners hear that though what I went through was trauma, it was traumatic. Trauma doesn't have to be dramatic in order for it to be trauma.
Mm.
It just has to be really impactful. It can be traumatic if a close friend betrays you and a friendship dissolves and it impacts you in a way where it changes the way you see the world, yourself, others, the safety of the world. There's big T trauma and little T trauma, and it's not about comparing them.
Mm.
It's about saying your hurt matters.
Mm-hmm.
Your hurt matters to Jesus as much as mine did.
Mm-hmm. And forgiveness is possible. That's what.
Forgiveness is, it's not just possible
Mm.
for total healing. If someone holds unforgiveness and resentment in their heart,
Mhm.
They cannot be totally healed. I can't heal with that. It's like I can heal and I can have a good life and have a partial healing, but
Mhm.
there's always going to be that one piece
Mm.
that is left unhealed.
Yeah.
And the way our brain works is when we are in unforgiveness, our brain says, I have to remember everything that happened, when it happened, how it happened. So I keep that story alive and I hurt myself with that
Yeah.
because my brain remembers and it replays and replays and replays. And when I give myself the gift of laying that down
Mm.
and saying, I'm going to make some healthy boundaries, I'm going to make wise decisions, but I am going to be a person that walks in forgiveness. And, in my book, I talk about the story of Naomi in the Bible. And, Naomi and her husband lived in Bethlehem and they had two sons. They left their home in Bethlehem, went to a foreign land, and their two sons grow up, get married. But in the process, Naomi's husband dies and both her sons die. And so she takes one of her daughter-in-laws back with her to Bethlehem, her homeland. And when the women greet her, they're excited and they say, Naomi's here. And Naomi makes a comment and she says, don't call me Naomi anymore. She said, because God took me out plentiful, but he's bringing me back empty. He brought these afflictions on me. And so from now on, I will be known as Mara, which means bitter.
Mm.
And Naomi in the Bible, now this was in her grief,
Mhm.
but she was changing her name to her circumstances and to the past.
Mm.
And when God changed names in the Bible, he always changed them to the future and the promise and the going forward. And he changed Simon's name to Peter, which meant a rock. He changed Abram's name to Abraham, and it was about you will be the father of many nations. He changed Sarai to Sarah. And so we get a choice of what are we going to change our name to? Are we going to let God work with us and change our name to the future? Who will I be in the future? And this resonated with me because in the first weeks after everything had happened, I would have to go to the victim witness center because it was a crime.
Mhm.
And I would have to give, depositions and prepare for a trial. And every time I went there, I would have to sign in on a piece of paper. And this piece of paper had a red arrow and it said, victim, sign here. And something inside me did not, I would get angry when I would see that.
Mhm.
And I knew, and I told them, I said, I want you to know I will not be a victim. I was victimized. I
Mhm.
don't deny I was victimized. I was a victim that day. Yes, I was. But I don't have to be a victim the rest of my life. That's a part of my story, but that is not my whole story.
Mhm.
And I knew I didn't want to be bitter, unforgiving, stuck in the past. I wanted to have a life moving forward. And it was probably about a year and a half after everything happened. I went to go see the detective that had been assigned to my case because I wanted her to know the rest of the story.
Mhm.
She just knew what she saw in the emergency room and she asked me, she said, "Do you remember what you told me that day in the emergency room?" And I said, obviously I talked a lot that day in the
Yeah.
emergency room. I said, "No, I don't remember." And she said, "I will never forget what you said because I was training another detective and it just stood out to us." And she said, "You looked at me and you said, I will not let this experience go to waste. I will be a better therapist because of this."
Mm.
And even then, I knew that my name tag that I was going to wear, I was going to change my name to I'm going to get through this. I'm going to be better. I'm going to be healed. I didn't know how. It doesn't mean I healed that day in the
Mhm.
emergency room,
Mhm.
but I knew that I was going to do whatever hard work that took. And it was many things. It was community around me. It was things like journaling. It was going, and I saw great Christian therapists that helped me walk through things. It was a lot of things that was step by step by step because healing's not just linear, it's very messy.
Mhm.
But God meets us in our mess.
Right. I God meets us in our mess. That is no truer statement has ever been spoken.
Yeah, yeah.
Right,
He
Kimberly.
specializes, he specializes in that.
Exactly.
I think my favorite quote out of my book is I say that, okay, in the beginning, when I first met Andrew, I was feeling like Cinderella,
Mhm.
Princess Cinderella. But then I felt like Humpty Dumpty. And I felt like I fell off the wall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put me back together again. But then I ran to the King of Kings,
Mm.
and the King of Kings knew exactly how to pick up my pieces.
Yes. Amen and amen. Kimberly, thank you so much for your time. Now, where can our listeners find your book?
Yeah, they can find my book anywhere books are sold. They can go to my website, kimberlyhaar.com,
Mhm.
and Haar is spelled Haar.
Mhm. Mhm.
They can go to Amazon, they can go to Baker Books, they can go to Books a Million, they
Mhm.
can go to it's sold in Target online, Barnes and Noble. So anywhere books are sold, go ask for it. Go
Right.
ask for it in your libraries and you'll find it.
I'd love that. The book is called Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts. I learned so much from this book. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time,
Thank you
Kimberly.
so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Authors Amplified. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and subscribe for more incredible authors next time.